So I've been interested in shooting a feature film on Super 8 for a while. My first film, Frankenstein's Bloody Nightmare, I started shooting in 2005, and then I finished it and edited it and got out there in 2006. But long before that, I'd been interested in shooting just not like a short film, but an entire feature-length film in Super 8. And I think this comes from there was a lot of reasons why. I mean, first of all, I grew up in the 90s, which I think as far as growing up and being a young filmmaker, I think it was one of the worst times to grow up and be a young filmmaker, because it wasn't like the 50s and the 60s and 70s where you had actual film to play around with. I mean, if you were a young kid in like the 70s, you could go to a store and buy Super 8 and buy Super 8 film editors and everything. In the 90s, we were dealing with video, with VHS. And VHS is a great format to watch and rent movies on, but as far as editing, it's very primitive. I mean, even the most advanced six-figure editing machines, the controllers, the decks, that big equipment, it requires big boxes and big equipment and big rooms. And the quality is nothing like what you can get with just like a pair of just rewinds with a little tiny Super 8 editor, and you can play around with shots and you could do stuff. So growing up in the 90s, I immediately kind of realized, okay, there's an older way of doing things. There's maybe a better way of doing things. Now I think in the digital age, it's kind of weird that we've kind of gone back to, I mean, to edit digitally, it feels a lot more analog and authentic than video editing, which is, to me, in my mind, it feels like just dubbing tapes. You're just very, very sophisticated ways of dubbing tapes, but you're just basically dubbing tapes. And every time you're editing something, there's a generational loss. There's trying to make sure that the tape keeps rolling, doesn't screw up on you, and blah. I mean, I realized this even as a kid, and in my futile experiments in video editing and everything. And I'd go to libraries. I'd read books, read filmmaking books, read these old filmmaking books, and it was all these old Super 8 techniques of putting things in front of your camera and shooting things in stop motion and doing all this. And I started reading Cinemagic magazine. I would send away even in the late 80s and early 90s, you could get back issues of Cinemagic in Starlog and in Fangoria. You could still buy these Cinemagic magazines, and the Cinemagic articles and the covers, and it was all about proselytizing and pushing Super 8 filmmaking, which really by the early 90s was kind of dead. I mean, there were Super 8 filmmaking by the late 80s and early 90s was going into, like, the people who were doing it, who were involved in that kind of filmmaking, were like underground filmmakers. They were like Richard Kern and Jörg Buttgereit in Germany. And I would again, I'd read like Film Threat and all these magazines, and I'd read about films like the Necromantic films and J.R. Bookwalter's The Dead Next Door. That was a big inspiration. I found a VHS of The Dead Next Door, and I was like, oh my God. And then there was this full-length movie, Darkness, that Leif Jonker in Kansas, and that really blew my mind. And then Darkness started to get kind of hyped up, and so throughout the 90s, really, from the time that I was like, 10 or 12 years old to the time that I was like 21, I was obsessed with Super 8 filmmaking. I was like, that's the way. And I did in film school. I did some 16 millimeter short films. I did one that I thought was really good. There was a really interesting 16 millimeter short film called Pygmalion Galatea, and then did some other 16 millimeter stuff, which I didn't really. I mean, I tried to buy. I bought this. I tried to buy my own equipment. I bought this Krasnor Russian 16 millimeter camera, and it was okay, but it didn't really. it was always a little bit janky. And in the 90s though, I found this yard sale, this Chinon Super 8. It was a PXL series camera. The XL meant that it had a wider aperture. It could let in more light, and it could shoot in lower light circumstances. So by around 2004, 2005, I've been graduated from film school for a while, and I was just fed up with it. I'm like, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go make a movie, and I'm gonna do it in Super 8. And it's gonna, and even, in the late 90s and the early 2000s, there was this resurgence in European horror film of Jess Franco and Lucio Fulci and Joe D'Amato and all of that stuff. And I was really taken with those films, and I wanted to make something that looked a little vintage and retro and different and older. And so I felt one of the best ways to do that was shooting in Super 8. So that's really what I did. I mean, I just picked up my old camera that I'd had sitting, in the corner of my room for about 10 years. I picked up this Chinon XL camera, and I didn't really know anybody, and started putting out casting calls and casting notices, and shooting my film. I remember the first casting notices I put up, in like recreational centers, and people would tear them down, and then going to getting onto Craigslist and putting up all of these casting calls, and I didn't really have anywhere to meet with people. I meet people in coffee shops, and I would tell them about my movie and my ideas, and they would just like laugh at me, and it was it was an interesting vibe. But I eventually found some really good cast people. I found this actress Amy Olivastro, and then I got involved with these guys who did this local creature feature show called Nightmare Theater, and they were really helpful, and they're in the movie, and it's just like in this, I was so much in the shell, but just this idea of I just put the stake down. It's like, I'm gonna make this movie. It's gonna happen. Things start to happen if you move forward. It's like if you do that kind of mental strategy of just moving forward, I found that things just get done and things happen. And if you want things to happen, things happen. And that's really what I did. That's really what I did. Shooting with Super 8. Well, first of all, there was no stores around me where I could get the Super 8 primarily is sold in these little cartridges, these Super 8 cartridges, because Super 8 was a home movie format. The whole idea behind Super 8 was it's just like a little cartridge, like a VHS cartridge, and you pop it in the thing and the camera, and you get a few minutes of running time. And again, I was on no budget. So I had to use the PXL. And the PXL camera, when I bought it at the yard sale, it had been in the original box, the original styrofoam container, and the silver box that surrounded it, and it was in pretty good condition. It looked really good. It could only shoot 18 frames per second, and then it could also shoot, it had a little trigger, and it could shoot still frame, stop motion. And if you look at all the pictures of these Chinon cameras, you notice there's a little rubber lens hood there. And that was made of some soft rubber, and it just basically turned into like putty. A black tar-like putty that threatened to get all over the actual, the viewfinder. So you were like, oh my God, I can't watch it. And then also on your eye. And it was just, you look at most pictures online on eBay of these Chinon cameras, and that thing is just gone. It's just disintegrated. And my camera was exactly like that. It disintegrated. It had gone. And but I started shooting with it, and I ordered my film from Kodak, just ordered it directly, ordered the cartridges, and I started to get them developed, and I was impressed by the color. I mean, the thing about shooting with Kodachrome, which is what I wanted to shoot my film on Super 8, and not. And the thing is, if you shoot on Super 8, okay, great, you're shooting on Super 8, but the driver behind shooting Super 8 is that you could shoot in this very old film stock that's called Kodachrome, and it's not like a modern negative stock. It's a reversal stock, and it is and it's like Technicolor in that it's like a pack of these different emulsions into this one packed film strip. You can actually still develop on your own Kodachrome with using some developer chemicals, but I think you can only develop it in black and white. So, and I tried to follow the steps because I seen some do-it-yourself like Kodachrome. So I never did that with the real with the actual real footage, but there was some rolls where I experimented and I never could get the stuff to develop. But I'm not. I've developed some photos before, but I'm not a full one-man band developer. I'm just a one-man band filmmaker. I cast myself in the lead role because there was nobody else. And there were moments where I would, start recording, start shooting. And this was hard. This would be easy in video, but imagine doing this in Super 8. Start recording and then run in front of the camera and do your scene. That was crazy, But eventually, shooting, and I worked at a couple of local businesses in where I was growing up and living right now in Northwest Florida, and where I lived when I shot the movie, rather. And they let me use like some hallways and certain things, and I shot some things in the public library. I was always looking for architecture that, like the public library or something that looked like kind of 70s or 80s. I saw this this little short film rather by Damon Packard called the what is it, the 1970s horror film trailer, and that really I think inspired me more than anything to go and do it, because I was like, that 1970s horror film trailer looked so cool. He did this. He was just running. He's just this guy running around Los Angeles doing, photographing all of this kind of 70s. You can find in Los Angeles even to this day, or when I was in Los Angeles, 7, 8 years ago, you could find a lot of like 1970s looking architecture still kind of up and in use. And so that's a great way. Well, and in small towns, there's also a lot of kind of vintage looking houses and buildings and architecture that you can find. I found often public libraries, they're kind of a lot of times behind the times, and you can use that. So I was always looking for places that kind of had a timeless look, because I was doing this story, this mad scientist story. This guy, his wife or significant other, it's always never clear, dies, and he then has this robot that goes out and kills people. And so it was a little bit of Astro Zombies. It was a little bit of European horror. It was a little bit of a lot of things in this kind of this idea. And like most scripts I wrote, I didn't actually start with a script, and there was some actresses are like, is there even a script? I just had this idea of just doing things like Paul Morrissey in Flesh for Frankenstein, of just improvising on set. And I realized, I've got to write a script, and it was the quickest time I ever took to write a script. I wrote the script in like about a week. Well, because I knew what I wanted. But it was just kind of like getting a script out to show people. Now, a lot of the script most script I did follow basically, but again, it's like when I make most films, now I write scripts, but you have the spine of the plot, and then you have all the scenes that you write. But then, within that, you can take things out and you can bring them in, and sometimes you can't shoot. You don't have the time or the money to shoot a scene, so you have to kind of compensate for that. Developing the film was a challenge. I mean, the only people in the United States who could develop Kodachrome, the beautiful vintage-looking Kodachrome K40 stock, the reason to shoot on Super 8 to get that vintage Technicolor look, super saturated, beautiful, reversal film look. The only people who could develop that were Dwayne's in Parsons, Kansas. The Dwayne's Photo in Parsons, Kansas. Sending the film directly to Dwayne's was a little bit expensive, and I found out this little thing, this way to get the film developed by Dwayne's, which was that Walmart would still develop Super 8 film. The kiosks, the photo kiosks at Walmart, I could drop the film off at the photo kiosk, which were run by Fuji. Fuji would send would send the Super 8 film to Dwayne's, and they would send it back, and it would show up at Walmart. This was something that I read about online of people doing this, and at times there was some treacherous stuff involved because, I mean, you're dealing with Walmart, and people don't understand Super 8 film and the fact that you could send it through Walmart. Sometimes I had heard people having problems because the people who worked at the photo booths at Walmart would get rather confused at this, but I had zero problems, and this film could have been lost. It could have been, it was my precious film I was sending through Walmart. And, but really the way the Fuji worked, though, is that when you send film, or when you send, I don't know, I haven't done it in a while, when you send film through that Fuji kiosk, is that, the package that you put your film in, your roll of negative, or in my case, my little Super 8 cartridge, had a reference number attached to it. So there was an 800 number where you could call the 800 number and get the status, and that's what I would do constantly. And I had this whole phone tree thing. I had it locked down. I had figured out what the comments that I got back from the automated response meant, because, I mean, of course, it's going to Fuji, and then it's going to that outside supplier, that vendor, Dwayne's, and then it's coming through Walmart. And it worked well. It was very cheap. I think it was only made like between $8 or $9 and $10 a roll. It was just nothing. It was maybe like half the price, maybe even a quarter the price of shipping it directly to Dwayne's, or shipping it to somebody else who would ship it to Dwayne's. I mean, the film had to get to Dwayne's. There was only one place in the friggin' country that could develop this film. So you either send it directly to Dwayne's, or you send it through some kind of go-between, which was Fuji at Walmart. These little kiosks. It was crazy. It was crazy. It was nuts. And I told my lead actress about this, Amy, and she was a very free spirit, and she's like, "But Walmart's evil. Why are you doing that?" And I'm like, because I have to get the movie made. I had no money, So I did shoot a lot of inserts in video, and I shot it with a standard definition video camera shooting 30 frames per second, and I found a chain of filters, Magic Bullet, and then there was this other piece of software, Cinelook Film Damage. And using multiple chains of these filters, I was able to get video to look like Super 8. And I mean, now there's an iPhone app that allows you to really get a very good Super 8 effect. Yeah, I mean, if I was shooting the film today, I don't know if I'd shoot in Super 8. I mean, well, first of all, shooting Super 8 today is so much more expensive and harder. I mean, in the past couple of years, Kodak has by when I mean the past couple of years, 2016, 2017, 2018, in this time frame, Kodak is trying to come back as this kind of boutique, vintage. They have released some Super 8 cameras and Super 8 film. They're not bringing back Kodachrome. I mean, that's a very work-intensive process. I guess if you ever want Kodachrome again, I think the only hope is that somebody in China or in Europe starts developing the stock. And there was always that story that Kodak sold all of their Kodachrome developing equipment to some entity in China. So that's where it's at. But overall, I mean, I got what I wanted. To to make a long story short, I got what I wanted. I shot this thing in Super 8, and that was also, I felt it to be a good kind of marketing angle, because I thought people would like a little vintage type of homemade type of a thing, and something a little bit different. You know, I don't know if people really respect that anymore. I think people respect, you've got to have like a robot or things blowing up, or you got to have all this CGI in your, even if your movie costs $2, you've got to have that. It's got to be big. It's got to be great. I don't know if the whole, J.R. Bookwalter type of generation of like little, independent, 90s video makers. They used to call them video makers back in the 90s. It was Video Maker magazine. I don't know if those type of filmmakers are really out. The Kevin Lindenmuths, the J.R. Bookwalters, the Scooter McRae's, the Polonia, but I guess maybe somebody knows the Polonia brothers. But these are, in the 90s, the people that were inspiring me to go out and shoot on Super 8, the Don Dolers. And so I got what I wanted eventually, and I moved away from Super 8, and I think, I mean, I guess if people want to shoot in Super 8 now, it's and just to try it out, I think it's fun. I don't know if shooting a full film would be economically viable, because every year it becomes the film related products get more boutique, and they get more expensive, and they get more and more and more out of reach of filmmakers. And also, digital technology is so good that you can make your film look like you can make it look like film. And if you're this type of tortured, maybe I kind of was at one point, this tortured soul who believes that you have to shoot on film for the authenticity and integrity of it, I think you have to realize that there's no such thing as far as getting a movie made, that authenticity, integrity, that comes in with working with people and your work habits, and that requires authenticity, integrity. But as far as authenticity or fidelity to a specific way of making movies, that's just, movies are about illusion. They're about tricking people. They're about tricking people into the illusion that there is motion on the screen. And so any trick that you can use, whether it be CGI or whether it be digital or whether it be film grain, there's nothing precious about film grain. It's just an artifact of the way that the photochemical process was created. It's just little silver particles. It's just little silver buzzing particles. And so, I mean, whether it's real film grain or whether it's something that you digitally put on the film, it's whether it's like a plate of real film grain that you digitize and then put over your video, I think any trick you can use. I don't have any fidelity to one technique. It's just, movies are just like, they're a magic trick. They're an illusion, and anything you want to use in making that illusion, it's fine. To kind of try to put your hands, to strap yourself in and say, I can only use one type. I mean, it's like a magician. I mean, David Copperfield can use any kind of illusion, whether it be perspective or wire, anything to fool the audience, to get the reaction. I mean, that's ultimately what you're going for. So, yeah, I loved making Frankenstein's Bloody Nightmare. I loved the experience of shooting in Super 8. If there was an infinite budget and infinite everything, I wouldn't shoot in Super 8. Shoot in 16 millimeter, 35 millimeter. I mean, Super 8 again, it's a little tiny. I mean, I don't know if there's really a reason today to shoot in Super 8 a long form project. And I know other people have been doing that, and I think if there's a specific reason, I think if you can get a deal on the camera, the film, the processing, if there's a kind of a through line and a way to do it in an economical way, I think it's cool. I think it still is a good kind of marketing angle or way to bring people into your film, because I think there is an audience. There is and I think a growing millennial hipster audience who are growing up in this kind of virtual fake world, that they're looking for something kind of real. They're looking for some kind of permanence, and up comes Kodak trying to sell them that in a boutique, vintage type of very expensive resurgence in Super 8. But so I mean yeah, I mean I mean Super 8. I think people are still fascinated by it, and I think, and as I said, the young millennial audience is fascinated by it, but. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's a practical way of doing things, and I think you can have far more control. And I think that's, as a filmmaker, what you're looking for eventually. I think if you want what you want as a filmmaker is you want control. You know, you want to be able to control everything that goes on in your film. That digital allows you a lot more control in a much more economical way.